For most of human history, a confident witness was treated as a reliable witness. If someone looked you in the eye and said, "That's the man," courts believed them. Juries believed them. It made sense. Confidence felt like proof. In 1984, a college student named Jennifer Thompson was attacked in her apartment in Burlington, North Carolina. During the assault, she made herself study her attacker's face. She wanted to remember every detail so she could send him to prison. Weeks later, she picked a man named Ronald Cotton out of a photo lineup. She was certain, not mostly sure, certain. He was convicted. He served more than 10 years. Here's the part that should bother you. DNA evidence later proved Ronald Cotton was innocent. The actual attacker, a man named Bobby Poole, had been in the same prison the whole time. For a long time, the legal system assumed a simple idea. The more confident a witness sounds, the more accurate they are. The actual story is stranger than that. Confident wrong answers and confident right answers can sound identical from the outside. Jennifer Thompson wasn't lying. She wasn't careless. Her memory had simply reconstructed itself into something that felt completely true and was completely wrong. That case isn't rare. More than 70% of wrongful convictions later overturned by DNA evidence involved a confident eyewitness misidentification. Think about that for a second. Confidence was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case again and again in cases where it turned out to be false. So is confidence worthless as evidence? That's the question. And the answer isn't what either side of this debate wants it to be. Some memory scientists now argue confidence can be a real signal of accuracy. Others point to the exoneration numbers and say the opposite. Both groups are looking at the same data, they just aren't always looking at it at the same moment in time. That distinction, the moment when confidence gets measured, turns out to be the whole story.
This isn't just a courtroom problem. It's a problem with how memory itself works, and that's what makes it worth understanding. Every day, people make confident calls based on memory. A doctor recalls a patient's symptoms from a chart they reviewed an hour ago. A manager remembers what was agreed to in a meeting last month. A parent is sure they told their kid about the dentist appointment. None of these moments feel uncertain from the inside. That's the strange part. Uncertainty doesn't announce itself. A false memory and a true one can both arrive with the exact same emotional weight. Ronald Cotton spent over a decade in prison because of that exact gap. Not because Jennifer Thompson was a bad witness, because her brain did what every human brain does under stress. It filled in gaps, smoothed out details, and presented the final result as a complete, vivid memory. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction, built fresh every time you retrieve it. Each time you remember something, you're not replaying a tape, you're rebuilding the scene from fragments, and small distortions can sneak in during that rebuild. So when courts ask juries to weigh confidence, they're really asking jurors to read something that looks identical, whether it's accurate or not. That's the actual problem psychologist John Wickstead spent decades trying to solve. His answer, and the answer of researchers working alongside him, didn't throw out confidence entirely. It changed the question. Instead of asking, "Is this witness confident?" the better question turned out to be, "When did we measure that confidence?" That single shift, in timing rather than tone, is what separates a useless signal from a genuinely useful one. And to understand why timing matters this much, you have to look at what actually happens inside a witness's memory in the hours and days after a crime.
Here's the assumption almost everyone carries into this topic. People assume memory either works or it doesn't. You either remember something correctly or you don't remember it at all. That's not how it functions. Memory degrades and reshapes itself continuously. And it does that whether or not you're aware it's happening. When Jennifer Thompson first viewed that photo lineup, her memory of the attacker's face was as close to its original state as it would ever be. She hesitated. She looked at several photos. She eventually settled on Ronald Cotton, and an officer told her she'd picked the same man she'd picked from a previous photo array. That single sentence mattered enormously. It wasn't new evidence. It was confirmation, delivered after the fact. And confirmation does something specific to memory. It locks in a belief and inflates confidence, even when the underlying memory hasn't changed at all. By the time Jennifer Thompson testified in court months later, her confidence had grown, not because her memory had improved, because every retelling, every confirmation, every familiar glimpse of Ronald Cotton's face in a courtroom had reinforced a memory that was already wrong. This is the part legal reformers spent years trying to get judges to understand. Courtroom confidence, the kind a jury actually sees, is the least reliable confidence of all. It's been shaped by repetition, feedback, and time. The confidence that actually means something is the confidence recorded at the very first identification, before any of that contamination has a chance to happen. Not courtroom confidence, not the confidence in a closing argument, the confidence captured in the first few seconds before anyone confirms anything. That distinction sounds small. It restructured how psychologists think about memory reliability altogether, and it points to something happening at a much deeper mechanical level inside the brain. So what's actually happening inside the brain when someone identifies a face? This is where the science gets specific instead of philosophical. Recognition memory works on something researchers call signal strength. When you see a familiar face, your brain isn't running a yes or no checklist. It's measuring a kind of internal signal, a sense of familiarity, and that signal varies in intensity. A strong signal feels unmistakable. A weak signal feels like a guess dressed up as a memory. The brain doesn't always tell you which one you're experiencing. This is the basis of something called signal detection theory, and it explains why confidence and accuracy were ever connected in the first place. Under clean, uncontaminated conditions, a strong, fast, automatic identification usually reflects a strong memory. A slow, effortful, hesitant identification usually reflects a weak one. That relationship is real. Wickstead and his colleagues found it consistently across multiple lab studies when they measured confidence at the moment of the very first identification. But that signal is fragile. It can be amplified by outside information that has nothing to do with the original memory at all. A nodding officer, a photo viewed twice, a defendant's face becoming familiar simply from sitting in a courtroom for months. Once that happens, the brain can't tell the difference between a strong memory and a strong sense of familiarity built from repetition. Both feel the same from the inside. Both produce the same confident statement out loud. That's the mechanism. Confidence isn't a measurement of truth, it's a measurement of signal strength, and signal strength can be inflated by anything that increases familiarity, whether or not that familiarity comes from the original event. Which means a system designed to protect innocent people needed a very specific fix. Not eliminate eyewitness testimony, just freeze the signal in place before anything could touch it. The historical record on this goes back further than DNA testing does, and that's worth sitting with for a moment. In 1932, a Yale law professor named Edwin Borchard published a book called Convicting the Innocent. He'd studied 65 cases of wrongful conviction, decades before DNA evidence existed. The single largest cause he identified was eyewitness misidentification. Confident, sincere witnesses picking the wrong person was already a documented pattern before anyone had the tools to prove it scientifically. Borchard couldn't run a brain scan, he could only count cases, and the count kept landing on the same cause. 60 years later, technology caught up to the pattern. In 1992, lawyers Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld founded the Innocence Project, using DNA testing to re-examine old convictions. The first DNA exoneration in the United States had already happened 2 years earlier, in 1989. By the time researchers tallied the numbers decades later, the project had helped overturn hundreds of convictions, and that same statistic kept reappearing. The majority involved a confident eyewitness who turned out to be wrong. That's two independent eras of evidence gathered with completely different methods, 80 decades apart, pointing at the same mechanism. Not a coincidence, it's the whole point. So in 2014, the National Academies of Sciences stepped in. They convened a panel of researchers, judges, and legal experts to review the entire body of evidence on eyewitness identification. Their report recommended a specific set of reforms: double-blind lineups, where the officer administering the lineup doesn't know who the suspect is; recording confidence statements immediately in the witness's own words before any feedback can occur; avoiding any comment that might confirm or reward a choice. These weren't abstract suggestions. They were direct responses to exactly what happened to Ronald Cotton: an officer's casual confirmation, a photo seen twice, a memory contaminated before it ever reached a courtroom. Around the same time, John Wickstead and Gary Wells published their joint analysis, the one that argued initial confidence, gathered under those reformed conditions, was actually a strong predictor of accuracy. Not a weak one, not a coin flip, strong when measured correctly. That paper didn't contradict the exoneration data, it explained it. The eyewitnesses in wrongful conviction cases weren't confident at the moment of their first clean identification. They became confident later, after contamination, after confirmation, after months of a system reinforcing a memory that had already drifted. Two fields, psychology and legal history, converged on the same conclusion from different directions. The variable was never confidence itself. It was when that confidence got measured and how much had touched the memory before anyone wrote it down. Police departments across the country have since started recording lineup identifications on video, capturing the witness's exact words and exact confidence level within seconds of the choice. That single procedural change, born from decades of documented failure, is now treated as one of the more effective safeguards the system has. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If contaminated confidence looks identical to honest confidence, how many other places in daily life is the same swap happening, unnoticed?
Here's the part most people don't expect. The contamination effect isn't limited to crime witnesses. It happens in completely ordinary memories too, and researchers have caught it happening in real time. In a study led by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, decades before the Innocence Project existed, participants watched a film of a car accident. Afterward, they were asked questions using slightly different wording. Some were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. Others were asked the same question using the word hit. The word smashed produced higher speed estimates. It also produced something stranger. A week later, those same participants were more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass at the accident scene, even though there wasn't any. Nobody lied. Nobody made anything up on purpose. A single word inserted after the event rewrote a detail inside an existing memory, and the new version felt just as real as the original. That's the mechanism working exactly the same way it worked on Jennifer Thompson, just without a courtroom attached. New information entering after the fact doesn't sit beside the old memory, it blends into it. Which means confidence built after exposure to outside information isn't measuring the original event anymore. It's measuring a merged version, stitched together from the real memory and everything that came afterward. So what happened next was researchers started testing how durable this effect actually was. The answer surprised even some of them. False details introduced this way could survive for months, sometimes longer, and they often felt more vivid, not less, the longer they sat in someone's memory. Vivid isn't the same as accurate. That's the gap the entire eyewitness reform movement was built to close, and it's a gap that exists in your own memory right now, whether or not a crime is involved. This shows up far outside of courtrooms and lab experiments, in places you'd never think to question. Take workplace meetings. Two people walk out of the same conversation with completely different, completely confident memories of what was agreed to. Neither person is lying. Each one reconstructed the meeting afterward, filling gaps with assumptions that felt like facts by the time they were recalled. The ancient example is Ronald Cotton's photo lineup. The modern equivalent is a Slack message sent days after a meeting summarizing what someone is sure was decided. The specific difference is stakes. Nobody goes to prison over a misremembered deadline. The specific similarity is the mechanism itself. Confidence inflates with repetition and time, regardless of whether the memory underneath it is accurate. This is why the most effective fix, in courtrooms and in offices, looks almost identical. Capture the account immediately, in the person's own words, before discussion, correction, or repetition can reshape it. Meeting notes taken in real time outperform recollections gathered the next day for exactly the same reason a recorded lineup statement outperforms courtroom testimony months later. Even eyewitness training programs for police now mirror something workplaces have started doing without realizing the connection. Write it down immediately. Don't let anyone, including yourself, revise the account before it's recorded. The villain in this story was never the witness. It was the assumption that confidence is a fixed, honest signal that survives contact with time and other people's input. The hero turns out to be something almost mundane: timing, capturing belief before the world has a chance to edit it. That's the four-part contrast in full: an old crime, a new meeting room, a difference in consequence, and an identical flaw sitting underneath both of them.
Ronald Cotton was exonerated in 1995 after serving more than 10 years for a crime he didn't commit. Jennifer Thompson, the woman whose confident identification convicted him, later met him in person. She had to reconcile a memory that had felt completely true with a fact that proved it wasn't. What's changed isn't the courtroom. It's what we now know happens between an event and a statement about that event. Confidence was never the lie. It was never the proof either. It was a measurement taken at a single moment in time, and every moment after that first one had the power to quietly rewrite it. The fix wasn't to stop trusting witnesses. It was to ask one different question. Not, how sure are you? When did you become that sure?